Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'll be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election in the state of Florida, and I'll be analyzing this state, talking about the polling here, and why I don't believe that this state is going to be competitive despite some of the discussions we've been having over the course of the past few weeks. First, I do want to briefly say my apologies for the lack of posts in the past 4 or 5 days. My computer was literally broken, and I just got it back today, so not much I could do about that, and very unfortunate timing, I know, but we're going to get right into it now. We're going to be going, all gas, no brakes till election day. So Florida, let's talk about it. This state, we've seen a bunch of polls. They're all pretty consistent. The past week, they've shown a close race. And we got a poll from RMG Research, which is this poll is founded by a Republican. It's nonpartisan, high quality pollster. They have Trump only up by 2. And Harris is at 48%. That's where she wants to be here. And again, let's just to talk about Florida here. Donald Trump won the state by 3.4% in 2020. He lost nationally by 4.5%. So we know that this state tends to be about 8% to the right of the country, and it's trending right. So if Donald Trump's winning it by less than he did in 2020, he's very likely to lose the election, just based on how Florida tends to vote relative to the country. And again, in the 2022 Senate election here, we saw Marco Rubio win by almost 17 points, and Florida, again, moved right there. So we know if Donald Trump's only up by 2 here, that's not a good sign. And let alone, him losing it. If Donald Trump were somehow to lose Florida and its 30 electoral votes, he would have essentially no path to an electoral college victory. But regardless, let's talk about the other polls. We did get a PPP poll. This is commissioned by a Democratic PAC. They showed a 4-point Trump lead. We saw McLaughlin, which is actually a GOP poll. They only had Trump up by 5 here, which I think could be the most concerning sign of them all, because McLaughlin, right, this is a poll that has, over the course of the past 8-10 years, been very, very bullish on Republicans, because obviously it is a Republican pollster. And famously in 2018, they had the Republicans winning in Barbara Comstock's district, which they lost by, I think, 13 points on election day. In every election, they kind of, produce results that are a lot more favorable to the GOP than the average. And so what we've seen is that really, if you translate past results from McLaughlin, a Trump-less 5 lead is more like a tie, really. And this is, I think, concerning for Trump. And then that doesn't even get into the other polls. Victory Insights only had Trump up by 2. He's only up by 1 in Bullfinch Group's poll. He was up by 5 in Redfield, which is okay for him. And then Morning Consult, he's only up by 3. And then, again, the thing about Redfield is that they did a poll beginning of September. They had Trump up by 6. So Trump's lead was cut in half, really, or sorry, not in half. It decreased a little bit, and Harris gained on him over the 2-week period between those polls. And then obviously Emerson, which is also a high-quality, nonpartisan pollster that did actually underestimate Democrats significantly in 2022. They only have Trump up by 4. So the polls do show an advantage for Trump, but it's not, I don't think any of these polls really any slam dunks for him, especially because so many of them, like McLaughlin, you'd expect to lean GOP, and they show close races than you'd like. And the average, Donald Trump's at 49.7, Harris at 45.8. If we round up here and we give Trump a 50 to 46 lead, if he wins by that much, if he wins by 4 on election day in Florida, he's only doing a half point better compared to 2020, and that's not good enough to win nationally, and it's certainly not good enough to win nationally when you consider how Florida's voted relative to the country in recent years, like in 2022, where the country as a whole moved only a little bit to the right, stayed pretty stable, but Florida zoomed to the right. I mean, Marco Rubio outran Trump by 14 points, and the country, when you adjust for, in terms of the congressional vote in the country, when you adjust for uncontested races, it really only moved 3.5 points to the right. So all of those swings make us kind of think that Florida, even if Kamala Harris doesn't win it, if it's close, if Donald Trump's doing the same as he did in 2020, that's a very bad sign for him. And so let's talk about Florida today, because obviously if the state goes blue, it's game over for Trump. He can't win the Electoral College. And again, like I just said, if the state's close, just extrapolating based on the trends we know, it's not likely that this state is going to even, really matter, because if Trump only wins it by 3 or 4, just based on the trends, like I said, he's going to lose the election. So today we're going to look at these polls, and I'm going to tell you whether or not I think Trump actually is in any danger of losing Florida. And so the best way to look at just where we kind of get our opinions on the polls from is look at the previous election, because everyone likes to look at the previous election and say, hey, look, well, the polls were off by this much, so if we just adjust for that, we're going to know the answer. And that's not a great strategy, because if you did that in 2022, you would have had Republicans winning 54 Senate seats and 240 House seats. Because again, In states like Nevada on election day, Republicans were up, even though in 2020, and excuse me, in Nevada they were up and they lost on election day, even though in 2020 they were down by 6 and they lost by 2.5. And again, a similar thing occurred in Pennsylvania where in 2020 Trump beat his polls by 3.5, but Dr. Oz underperformed his polls by 6. So the polling misses don't translate between cycles. And like I always say, again, on this channel, I always give this example. If I'm running a poll and I am trying to be nonpartisan, and in one election I missed the Republican support and I underestimate the GOP by 3, the next election in preparation, I'm going to overcorrect because I don't want to miss the same way twice because it makes me look partisan and I can't learn from my mistakes, right? So I'm going to overcorrect, and I'm actually more likely to miss the other way because I'm overcorrecting. And so that's why in 2022, we saw a lot of polls that really were terrified of getting a 2016 or 2020 repeat. So they adjusted their polls. They made the sample super Republican. And then election day, they got burnt because obviously the samples were too Republican and the actual electorate was a lot more even. And Democrats ended up winning a lot of undecided voters, which is why they won those competitive races across the country. And so that's why we see these polling misses that don't repeat themselves. And by the way, this isn't a criticism of polls. It's hard to do that, right? Like polls try to find the what I like to call like the polling Goldilocks zone, but it's so hard to find because no one knows how to do it, and we don't know what the right sample is. So this is all to say, I don't hate the polls. I think they're very useful, but what we do know is that right now, the polling miss that we're going to look at from 2020 can't be directly translated. With that being said, I will show you the polls from 2020 now. Biden was up by 2.5 on election day, and he lost the state by 3.4. So what do we know? That's a 6-point swing in favor of Trump relative to the polls. That is very bad. Again, not only for the polls, but for the Democrats, because we know that in the past, especially in states like Florida, they've been ahead and they've lost on election day to Donald Trump. In 2016, the polls are better in Florida, but they still were wrong by about a point. And again, in 2016, Florida was very close. It wasn't like 2020 where it was a decisive Trump victory. In 2016, this was a state that came down to the wire, and at many points on election night, it looked like Hillary Clinton was actually going to win the state. So what do we know? We know the polls have missed the same way twice. Doesn't mean they're going to miss the same way again because of 2022, but it's still something we have to keep in the back of our minds. Now, the more compelling piece of evidence to talk about when we look at whether or not Democrats actually have a chance here or are going to come close here is 2022. Now, in the governor's race, Ron DeSantis won by 19. But again, governor's races are a bit more local, so they're not a great comparison. But the good news for us is that we have a Senate race to compare to. And this was a race where Democrats actually spent a good amount of money. So did Republicans, to be fair. But Democrats ran a credible candidate. They spent a good amount of money, and they lost by 17 points. They lost this race in a midterm by nearly 1.3 million votes. In Florida, a state that in 2016 was decided by just tens of thousands of votes. And by the way, the 2018 Senate race that still haunts Democrats to this day because had they won it, they could have done a lot of things more effectively because they would have had a bigger majority. That 2018 Florida Senate race, Bill Nelson lost by 10,000 votes. And then in 2022, the very next time Florida has Senate race, that gap increased. In 2018, Democrats lost by 10,000. 2022, they lost by 1.3 million. So this state is trending red, and it's doing it at a very, very fast pace. Now, obviously, in 2022, the turnout benefited Republicans. There's no denying that. If we look at the counties and precincts that turned out at a higher percentage relative to the state, it was almost entirely all Republican areas, right? But the problem for Democrats is that even if you account for that, Republicans still won undecided voters. And by the way, they won over voters in Democratic areas. So if we take a look at Miami-Dade County, this is the biggest county in Florida. Democrats need to win it by 25-30 to have a chance of winning statewide nowadays. Miami-Dade County, Marco Rubio won it by 9. It wasn't even this county wasn't even close. It wasn't like he won it by a couple hundred votes. He won this county, again, he netted out of this county 68,000 votes. So, that's just a tremendous failure on the part of the Florida Democrats because in 2016, Hillary Clinton netted hundreds of thousands of votes here. She won by 29 points in Miami-Dade County. In the 2018 Senate race, Democrats, I think, won by 24 here. They netted, again, hundreds of thousands of votes. And now it's almost the opposite. Republicans are going to net or in 2022, they netted 68,000 votes. And we see a similar thing in Palm Beach County where Democrats you were winning by 35, 40 points every year. Val Demings won this county, but by 2,000 votes. It didn't make a dent at the statewide margin. To win Florida, Democrats used to have to win this county by hundreds of thousands of votes. and the 2,000 vote margin is going to cut it. So we see not only is it like Republican, turnout in these rural counties was sky high compared to Democratic turnout in their counties, right? But it was like, look, in Miami-Dade County, in Palm Beach County, we saw Democratic voters, especially Hispanic voters, move towards Republicans. And it wasn't only in the Senate race. If we go to the governor's race here, just to kind of take a look at what was happening, it was actually even better for Republicans because in the governor's race, Palm Beach County actually voted for Ron DeSantis. He actually won it by 3% over Charlie Crist. So Democrats, when compare that to the governor's race, this race could actually been pretty good for Democrats. So that's what you have to remember. Now, the argument for Democrats and for Kamala Harris being competitive in Florida this year is that these swings in Miami-Dade County are not predictable, and that just because it swung one way in 2020, 2022 doesn't mean it's going to swing the same way in 2024. And this is mostly because if you look back at the past 5-6 elections presidentially in Miami-Dade, it's been inconsistent. Because in 2016, Hillary Clinton won it by 29, sure, but in 2008, Obama won it by, I think, 20. And so that, in 2016, the 2008 margin looked bad for Democrats, but in 2008, it was good for Democrats because in 2004, John Kerry only won it by 5, right? So we saw Democrats won it by 5 in 2004. They won it by 20 in 2008. They won it by, I think, 25 in 2012, and then won it by 29 in 2016. And then it looked like it was trending blue, right? Because it trended blue a couple elections in a row. Then in 2020, it just moves back towards Trump, and he loses it by 7. And then in 2022, Republicans in the Senate race win it by 9. So obviously, that trend isn't linear. It's shifted back and forth. Democrats had it go in their way for, every in 2008, 2012, and 2016. But then Republicans since then have really been dominating here. And so obviously, some people are going to look at that and say, hey, look, we don't know how it's going to trend because if the past any indicator, it's unpredictable. But that's not a great argument because, again, when we looked at why Miami-Dade County swung to the left in 2008 and 2012, and then in 2016, it was because it was not because, but it was in part predicted by the fact that the polls were showing Democrats doing well with Hispanic voters, the fact that Republicans were not able to get the turnout they needed out of their areas in the county, and most importantly, Democrats were actually able to were actually able to turn out their voters because the Florida Democratic Party nowadays can't turn out their voters. And again, in South Florida, you have a lot of voters who might support the Democrats, but they don't turn out to vote, especially midterm elections. And so the Florida Democratic Party had a big problem with this in 2022, and it was a problem in 2018. If the Florida Democrats in 2018 had actually done 20, even marginally better in just one county, Miami-Dade, they would have won. Bill Nelson would be a senator right now. But again, that didn't happen. So those are the three factors that we have to consider. And those factors haven't changed since 2022. It isn't like in 2008 where Democrats actually got energized and Hispanic voters started polling better for them, right? Which would have suggested a big shift in Miami-Dade County, and we saw that shift between 2004 and 2008. This year, we have no indication of that. The only indication that I think is good for Harris in Florida is that, the statewide polls show a close race, but they did in 2022. Some polls showed it close between Rubio and Demings. We actually had a few leads for Val Demings in the summer, right? And in 2020, the polls also had Biden leading. So statewide polls aren't great. And we know that the polls nationally of Hispanic voters have been moving towards Trump. Again, that isn't to say Trump's going to win Hispanic voters, but he's doing 5-6 points better than he was in 2020. And so that is enough to me to kind of make me very skeptical of these Florida polls. So what should the takeaway be from this video? It should be, look, it's not over till it's over, but in Florida, we know Democrats have been burnt here before, and it looks like they're going to get burnt again. I think Democrats deep down, especially Democratic strategists in Washington, D.C., they're going to know that this race is not close. They're going to know that they don't have a path here. And even though it would be nice for Kamala Harris, because it would just, again, winning Florida essentially end the election, it's not very likely. And in a close race like this, again, you don't get fancy. You stick to where you have a chance. You go to Michigan, you go to Wisconsin, you go to Pennsylvania, you go to maybe Georgia and Arizona, North Carolina, right? But outside of those 6 or 7 states, 6 states plus Nevada, right? Those are the 7 states that are competitive. Beyond that, I don't think anything else really has a big chance to flip. There are some crazy scenarios that you could think about maybe, but realistically, it's 7 swing states, and Florida is definitely not one of them. So let me know what you all think. Let me know who you expect to win this state. Maybe I'm wrong. Tell me in the comment section down below. But with that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.